Hey y'all. So today I want to talk about what it looks like to expire or to be in a state where you're being forced into transition, what it looks like in the middle of transition. Before I go deeper into that, are in the description to all of my platforms. Patreon, if you are interested in gaining access to my library or my books, or interested in taking any of my courses. The enrollment for the fall session of School of the Empire is open currently. All the links to that are in the description down below. So, transition, right? And I'm going to be covering this from a few different angles. So, in general, transition is the state of going from one place to another, one phase to another. It's that awkward in between, it's the adolescent state of manifestation itself. So, depending on where you're going and what you're called to, what your journey is, where you're starting from, transition looks different for everybody. So one of the things that you kind of have to take into account is if you're beginning, let's say you're living your life in the flow of the spirit, you're living a surrendered life, you're moving with the flow of divinity, you're moving with the flow of God, the will of God for your life, the scroll that you have in heaven, whatever phrasing you're used to, you're moving in divine timing. But let's say you find yourself in a place where you've grown accustomed to your surroundings. Nothing's necessarily wrong, but it's time for you to go. This is where you enter into a crossroads, and this is usually where people mess themselves up. So at this point, the responsible thing to do is move once you recognize that time is up or time is almost up. Because what will then happen, let's say you stay, because most people do. Most people stick around long after they've already been notified of their expiration coming up. And there's a ton of things that begin to happen at that point. So, for one, since you were never intended to still be there, you often run into issues that you were never supposed to experience. You end up meeting people that you were never supposed to meet, at least at that time. You weren't supposed to encounter them yet, but you're no longer in divine timing. So you're meeting people too early, you're forming deeper bonds, you're getting more work added to your load. Whether we're talking this is your business life, your spiritual life, it doesn't matter. Transition looks really the same. And you'll often, so some people find themselves bogged down with more work and more obligations, more responsibilities, more soul ties, more connections, that now they're trapped. In order for them to leave, it'll now be a hard thing to do, and they'll run the risk of ruining some relationships that they've made, where it almost comes off as these people haven't done me anything wrong. Why would I abandon them? But understand this: this is not abandonment. This is divine timing. Part of flowing with the spirit is moving in the timing of the spirit. Most of our problems happen to being out of alignment with the times and seasons that we're supposed to be in. Yes, there are the months, yes, there are the ages, but each of us run on our own clock. We all have an individual destiny, and that individual destiny comes with its own timetable of when we're supposed to be where, when we're supposed to meet who. And the journey is really learning to stay in sync with that. And getting out of sync with that comes with repercussions that are different for everybody. Sometimes that could be as simple and direct as you getting into an accident, having some type of major catastrophe happen simply because you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be. Some of you are looking for spouses. You'll never find the spouse that God wants for you in a system that God never wanted you in. We expect for things to happen to us typically according to our own will, where this is where I'm at, so all the blessings must meet me here. And that's why most of us don't get the things that we're actually promised. This is why we don't walk in our inheritance large scale, is because we're comfortable with gaslighting ourselves into thinking that out of alignment is a good thing. That because I learned the verse that says he'll never leave me or forsake me and that all things are working for my good, that means that everything I do God's okay with, and everything that happens is God's sovereign will, and it's not. This is why there's such a thing as disobedience. This is why there's such a thing as the will of God. This means that God has a plan apart from what we choose to do. And it's up to us to flow in unison with that will or not. And there's consequences for either one. Sometimes flowing in the will of God means messing up your current situation by a lot. Or sometimes staying where you're not supposed to be means messing up everything. So it kind of reminds me of this. Oftentimes in the wild, birds, they'll build their nests and with like thorns and sharp parts towards the bottom, and they cover it with feathers and leaves. And then they'll lay their eggs. And then after their chicks hatch, after the babies hatch, they nurture them for a while until they're about ready. Then once they've reached a certain stage of maturity, the parent, whether it be the father or the mother bird, because birds are different, they begin to remove those feathers and leaves off of the bottom to make the nest uncomfortable. It then causes the babies to not want to be there anymore, so that they take that leap of faith and leave the nest. And I believe you get the parallel. This is something that happens to us all when we're someplace we're expiring from. It'll feel as if the environment itself is trying to get rid of you. And this isn't necessarily a challenge to prove your endurance. Oftentimes, it's slowly trying to get you to leave, prepared to leave. And one of the ways that you know that you're right on the cusp of transition is that for no reason at all, as in nothing necessarily changed, you just feel like I can't stay here anymore. It becomes unbearable to be where you are, whether that be a job, whether that be a spiritual community, no matter what it is, you feel that moment of I can't do this anymore. Not even saying there's anything wrong with what it is. Some cases it could be. You could be struggling with an addiction. You could be struggling with a bad relationship. You could be struggling with anything that's actually bad. But the end of it has to be the same, is that you get fed up enough with the current situation enough to demand something new. When I was leaving my former job, I'd been there for like 3 years. There came a point where I hated going there. Every day I clocked in. I was the best employee they had. They still begged for me to come back. I was the best they had. And it's not even that too much changed. It's just I was expiring. And I knew that I had two options. In fact, Yeshua actually told me. I was like, what is going on? Why am I so bothered out of nowhere? And he told me, he said, this is as far as you've kind of engaged to be. This is as far as you've made decisions for. So now instead of deciding what happens to you, life is just happening to you because you haven't decided what happens next. So after that, I took some time to make a decision because he told me, he said, if you actually want to stay here, you can. You can actually move up to be one of the higher ups in the company, no problem. But if you don't want that, you should leave because you're at a crossroads where your decision decides which way this goes. Which leads us to our next issue, indecision. Sometimes it's not per se that God has something specific for us in a certain area. Sometimes it's our own indecision that's blocking a manifestation of any sort to come about. Where it's like there's two situations placed before you, and since you've chosen neither, the game can no longer continue. Kind of like one of those choose your own adventures. It's like, well, you can either go left or you could go right, and you're just standing there not making a decision. Your destiny can unfold in either direction. Oftentimes, if you simply make a decision one way or the other, your destiny can unfold, but stagnation kills us more than anything. So I'm not even preaching stagnation. This is more so a warning of what happens when we stay stagnant. Even the idea of the Hebrews, name meaning they who cross over, the transitionaries. This is that they're a nomadic culture. In fact, the only story we have of them having an issue with the Egyptians is when they were someplace they weren't supposed to be. They were only supposed to be there for a little while, and they ended up staying there for a few generations and ended up in a captivity as far as the biblical narrative goes. The curse of stagnation. One of the greatest quotes by Bruce Lee that's inspired a ton of people is be water. Be like water. Be flexible like water. You meditate on the qualities of water. Be like that. It can take the form of whatever container. It's flexible. It's nourishing. But one of the other attributes of water is that it's pure chaos. That as long as water is moving, it's full of life and it's full of energy. This is why it says, out of your bellies shall flow rivers of living water. There's rivers of living water on the inside of you. That means it's moving, it's going, and you can either let it surge and flow through you and out of you or not. It's not a pool of living water. A pool that sits still, it starts getting algae, it starts getting mold and mildew. Water sitting still isn't a good thing. Your physical body is mostly water. Stagnation kills you. that's the simple math of Chinese medicine is stagnation is a bad thing. When energy can't flow, it causes issues in the body, so their practice is to get energy moving. This is the same with life. When things get too congested, it means something needs to move, and it's typically you. Very rarely will the situation that you may find yourself in be a result of someone else. 9 times out of 10 is you not making a decision. It's our own indecision that keeps us trapped, which leads to the curse of stagnation, which is decay, which is chaos. You can either choose the chaos of movement, which brings life, or the chaos of stagnation, which brings death. The choice is always ours. So here's the simple thing. When you learn how to live in divine timing, you have to choose your destiny. Otherwise, you'll suffer the consequences of not choosing it, which could be certain relationships. And let me touch on this subject a bit before I end the session. Certain relationships are only for a certain amount of time, or people can only be around you, be within your inner circle, as long as you're in a certain state, which means that once it's time for you to go, it's not that they were never your friend. That's lazy. It's not that they were never your friend. It's just that they were attached to you at a certain state. Some people can only be with you in a certain state, and that's not a bad thing. Separation, the loss of friends, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a see you later rather than a don't talk to me ever again. And oftentimes, the don't talk to me ever again happens after we've chosen the person over our destiny, and then all of it expires around us, where the grace for that runs completely out to the point where y'all both almost hate each other. Where it's like there's so much history between us. We may have been friends since we were kids, and all of a sudden, man, we hate being around each other. What's going on? Simple principle that people can't really function together if they're not going in the same direction. But all of us are called to a different thing, which means that just because they're your friend doesn't mean y'all are called to do everything together. Doesn't mean that y'all are actually called to be together forever. Not necessarily. So it's our emotional attachments that causes us to stick around or try to force people to stick with us far beyond when they were supposed to. And there's the other thing. So that's just the idea of you leaving. Some of you may have misunderstood other people having to separate, whether it have been from you as a friend, you as family, you as a business partner, you as a spiritual partner. You might have been in a spiritual community, a church, a mosque, whatever, a temple, and you leaving, or someone left your organization, whatever it is. Don't take it personal. Sometimes people's destiny is more than your organization. And the more we give each other grace for that, and just allow expirations to be expirations, uh, the more fun this life thing gets to be. I've heard people preach on that before where they're like, oh, no, 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 there's no such thing as God released me. Typically, they got church hurt. No, no, no. Everybody ain't got church hurt. Truthfully, relationships expire, seasons end. We're not supposed to be certain places forever. And if we stay there, for one, we don't, if we stay there because we don't want to be labeled as problematic, we become a problem. If we stick around just because I don't want people to think I have an issue with anybody, no, you're going to have issues with everybody because you're somewhere you shouldn't be. And that is going to manifest on its own timing. And oftentimes you'll recognize that. You'll be in the middle of a situation, in the middle of a catastrophe, and say, this wouldn't even be happening if I wasn't here. I should have went and did such and such that I knew I should have went and did that instead. We know this. Inherently, we know this. We have decisions to make, whether to choose our destiny or to choose familiarity. The fear of the unknown keeps us in prison. Where truthfully, a lot of this can be accomplished, a lot of this can be done, a lot of this can be fulfilled. But familiarity is, well, familiar. We know what's going to happen in a place that we may have been in for 5-10 years, maybe called to be there for 5 or 10 years. I was working with this one ministry, and it was the ministry I ended up meeting my wife at. And I remember God gave me a specific answer because I knew I was going to expire there. I just didn't know when, because I'm not a forever person, for one. But I also understand that most people aren't. They just get trapped and then learn how to work with it. And they believe that since good things happen to them, they still get blessings and God still talks to them and they still are forgiven, that everything is in God's perfect timing, and it's not. But I remember at this particular ministry, I was the cameraman. And God told, like, I asked God, how long am I supposed to be here? The father said 8 months. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be here for 8 more months. I'll be able to be y'all cameraman, no problem. If I would have stayed a week longer, it would have been torture. Because by the time that 8 months was up, I was ready to go. I'm not even saying they did anything to me specifically. It's just the time of expiration was precise, where I was fulfilling my 8 months that last month simply because God said 8 months. If it was up to me, I would have left sooner. And truthfully, I would have messed up some other things if I would have left too soon. Like I said, I ended up meeting my wife there. If I would have left too soon, we would have either not met when we did, not met at all. It would have been a lot of chaos. Problems that wouldn't exist if I just stayed in divine timing myself. So I don't want to beat a dead horse. As I said before, links to all of my stuff are in the description down below. School of the Empire, God's Garden, my book, Patreon. Help me get to 300 subs on Patreon. There's some things I want to do for y'all. There's some projects I'm working on that I'd love to release. Help get me to 300. We're almost to 1,000 subs. Help get me to 1,000. So with that being said, y'all be blessed and take care. Until next time. Later.